Tony, thanks for sitting down with us today. Uh, when did you start work with WREL-TV, or was it with WREL-TV, or was it another division of Capital?
Actually, it was WREL-TV. First of all, thanks for having me, John.
Okay.
Honored to be here talking about the history of Capital Broadcasting. Yeah, I was a starving freshman over at NC State. I needed to buy some books, and I needed to pay some tuition, so I actually got a job in the WREL Gardens. I started out literally digging ditches here, and worked in the gardens, I guess about a year, and felt like I had enough, and I was still going to school at the same time. So felt like I had enough money to get through perhaps the rest of my college career, and actually was going to leave the gardens and go back to school without working. And then one of the managers saw me in the parking lot, and he goes, "I hear you may be leaving us." And I was like, "Yeah, it's time to go back to school." And he goes, "Can you work weekends for me?" And I was literally right in the parking lot, Paul Pope. And I was like, "Well, yeah, I could do that." And that's how it all got started. So I came in, and my sophomore year started working weekends in the videotape department, projection department. So long ago, it was film and tape, and basically what I was doing was getting commercials ready for air. And did that my sophomore and junior year. Then my senior year, I took a master control position while still going to school. Graduated. I was supposed to be a banker. My roommate and myself, we grew up together in the little town of Franklinton, and we had roomed together all throughout college, and we both had to work throughout college to get through all the expenses. And we were going to be bankers, and to this day, David is still a banker. And but you know, TV got in my blood, and I was literally sitting at the master control switcher and saw the sports guys live out of state, and it was like, that was like going live from Mars. You might as well, anytime you went live outside the Beltline back in the 80s, it was a big deal. And I'd been hearing about this, you know, satellite uplink that we were going to be getting, and it just sounded all foreign to all of us. But we were the third TV station in America to get a KU band uplink. And I remember sitting at the master control switcher thinking this, you know, I'd seen Tom Suter live before, but never like this. And I thought maybe before I went into the business world, this was something I might want to try.
So you got bitten by the TV bug, really, and
I did.
Banking didn't stand a chance.
No. And you know, sometimes when I chat with my sweet mate, roommate David, you know, he's had a 9 to 5, you know, Monday through Friday, and he's had a good career, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. I really wouldn't.
Now, you made the move, I guess, from master control into the field, but you didn't go immediately to work on the satellite truck. You did ENG first, didn't you? Talk a little bit about that transition from inside the station to outside the station.
Well, that was part of the plan. So I went to the chief engineer, you know, when I'm sitting at the master control switcher there, and I go talk to the chief engineer, and I tell him I want to be the next satellite uplink engineer. And he looked at me and he goes, "What kind of an engineering degree do you have?" And I don't have one. I've got 2 business degrees, but I don't have an engineering degree. And he was basically looked at me like I had 5 heads and said, "You know, I don't think that's going to work. Thanks for your interest, but you know, this is a true engineering position." He explained to me, you know, why that might not work out. But a short time later, he did come back to me, and the engineer that was doing this position was very good at it, but he was more of a 9 to 5 guy and a newlywed, and he was thinking this was not for him. So basically, what it was presented to me to start out doing microwave and learn as much as I can, as fast as I can, and also part of the deal was to go back to school. So I graduated with 2 college degrees and literally went right back to school. The deal was I had to take a year of engineering type courses. So I took a semester of DC, took a semester of AC. The entire time I was running microwave trucks, maybe even for you back in those days. So that was part of the plan, and you know, learn as much as I could, and microwave trucks was a good way to do that. You didn't go too far. You were still doing remotes, still doing live television, but it wasn't that sort of thing where you may be traveling hundreds of miles out of state, in some cases thousands of miles, you know, by yourself. And so I spent about a year and a half doing microwave only before I transitioned over to the satellite truck.
Right, and for people who might not understand what we're talking about here with microwave, just give a real thumbnail description of how a microwave live shot happens.
Yeah, to this day it's still pretty much done the same way.
Mm-hmm.
It's on a 2 gigahertz frequency, and we have basically vans with pneumatic mast that, you know, many people have seen TV trucks at remote sites, and they see the high pole sticking out of the front or the back of it. But it's a point-to-point type signal where you transmit from your microwave dish on your remote truck to a fixed tower receive site. And, you know, they can have ranges up to 60 to 70 miles, depending on which receive site you're shooting at. We have a 2,000-foot tower that, you know, we can get 60, 70 miles in some cases. So it's pretty much what I call, you know, your local remote vehicle. Allows you to do things around town, you know, not going too far out. But essentially, to this day, we still do those the same way, in the 2 gigahertz band, and with a microwave truck with a mast.
So then you moved into the satellite world with LiveStar.
I did.
What was that about?
I tell you, you know, I was still kind of in the experimental stage. I thinking that wanted to give this a shot before I went into the business world. But I tell you, it was. I became hooked immediately. I did. You know, growing up seeing Tom Suter, growing up seeing Charlie Gaddy on location, although it was mostly local, but now being able to travel with these legends to these not just local events anymore. You know, the stage was now anywhere we needed it to be, or wherever the story was at. And that's, you know, growing up in North Carolina, I am one of the locals here at WRAL. You know, I hadn't traveled very much. So beginning to travel out of state, going to new cities. Before I knew it, my first ACC tournament, I think, was in Maryland that year. And then on to the NCAAs. We were at the Meadowlands my very first year running the uplinks. You know, you're looking out across the arena, and there's the skyline of New York City. You know, again, I could hardly pinch myself. I'm working with Tommy in, you know, these big arenas. It was, for me, it was magical, and to this day, it still is. And I'm a sports junkie. That's one of the reasons that I think it worked so well for me, and why I didn't get burned out like so many people do. You know, running a satellite truck, it's not when you want to do it and when you want to get off work. You go where the story's at, and you stay there until the story is over. And for me, it's, for the most part, I don't think you could send me far enough or long enough. And it's just been a wonderful career, and I still do some of it, you know, our bigger remotes to this day.
I mean, the technology behind satellite news gathering is pretty mind-boggling when you think about it. You're driving this truck that has a dish on it, an uplink, and you're pointing that thing at a satellite. How far away? How far up is that satellite?
So it doesn't. Here's the thing: it doesn't matter whether you're sitting in the parking lot at WRL TV here on Weston Boulevard, or you're sitting in a parking lot, say San Diego, all the way across on the West Coast. You're still hitting the same spot. It's 23,000 and approximately 400 miles up. So you're sending a signal, you know, what, over 46,000 miles, and a lot of people don't understand that. You know, maybe even some people in the television business don't really realize how far that signal is traveling. And
how do you aim it? How do you find the satellite?
Technology has changed. It really has. You know, back in, you know, all of us old timers, we're constantly, all of us old timers are constantly, you know, saying, well, back in the day. Well, back in the day, you know, it was literally finding a needle in a haystack. You know, you have what they call a spectrum analyzer, which is a graph of what the satellites look like, and you did everything manually. And in those days, it really took me about a year's worth of training in front of the racks as an operator, but also behind the racks to understand what was going on. Because again, you know, when you get thousands of miles away from the studio, we all have that luxury here in the studio of asking for help, but when you're thousands of miles away in some cases, you're kind of on your own in the technical world to overcome any kind of problems that you could have, and that was the most intimidating thing about it. But yeah, you manually would find satellites. You know, these satellites are in what they call geostationary orbit at a certain distance from Earth, which is 23,000 miles plus. The satellite's arc will move at the same speed as the Earth's rotation. So for the most part, they will stay in the same location, but you still have to manually find them back in the day. These days, we have the magic of GPS. A GPS satellite receiver can determine where you're at, latitude and longitude on this planet, and it can take that information and it can help find that satellite for you. And now there's even devices that will actually tell you what satellite you're on, so it's not quite as intimidating as it used to be. So the technical part of it, like many things, you know, technology has made things easier and maybe not as intimidating as it used to be.
And you've covered all kinds of news events. It's not just sports. It's not the glamour of the finals, the March Madness, or anything like that. You've covered any number of hurricanes and things like that. What's it like to be operating a satellite truck in the middle of a hurricane?
Well, one of my first ones was Hugo, and you know, many people to this day still remember that one. And it was, you know, I think the TV business, for a lot of us that do live television, and if you ever did play sports as a kid growing up in, you know, the high school level, to me it was always like suiting up for a game. You know, you would get those butterflies in your stomach, same way with just live TV in general. Now add in the fact that you've got this very expensive piece of equipment, a crew that's relying on you to get them on the air, and maybe even to keep them safe, depending on where you put that remote truck. But yeah, when you've got everybody fleeing an area for safety reasons, and we're going straight to it. I do remember Hugo like it was yesterday. You know, it was a very powerful storm, and we went 50 miles inland, and it was still a rough event to cover. But I've covered many hurricanes, including Fran, and I've had the eye go over our heads. It's exciting, but at the same time, we understand the danger of it. You know, there's 3 rules. First of all, you don't get hurt. Second of all, don't damage the equipment. And third, you get on the air. And usually if you follow that recipe, everything works out. And you know, if a storm is going to hit, and we're going to get a direct hit, if you can see water, you're in the wrong place. We've learned that. I've actually had a breaker come up underneath the satellite truck before, myself and David Crabtree on the Outer Banks. Nothing dangerous. But you know, it reminds you of how dangerous it can be. So we have to be safe at the same time, but it's exciting. I mean, it is, you know, to be dealing with these big events and doing your job at the same time.
I can't remember specifically, but weren't you on duty on 9/11, and didn't you go to New York?
I did.
What was it like sitting there on the other side of the Hudson, looking over at New York City late that day when you guys arrived?
Kind of gives me chills just hearing you say that. But that is one thing that, when the crew that I was with, photographer Ed Wilson and reporter Len Bestoff, and we have talked about it, we were that night standing on the Hudson looking across. And I can remember, I could hear the lapping of the water. Our eyes were not matching what, it was quiet. It was on one hand you could still see most of the city of New York, and it was beautiful, but to the right we knew what was happening, and the smoke and all the emergency lights that were reflecting off the smoke, and they were actually bringing victims across the Hudson in these water taxis because the hospitals over there could not handle. It was just hard to comprehend what we were actually seeing, and that was one of the. Everybody remembers what they were doing the day of 9/11, and to actually have gone there and gotten there that day and seen it with my own eyes, and I was up there for quite a few weeks. Truly the toughest thing I have ever covered, without a doubt. And have come kind of full circle with that story. A few years later, I was in Afghanistan, and our troops are over there, the 82nd, because of 9/11. So here, this story is continuing years later, and now I'm embedded with a WRAL news crew in a war zone because of what happened that day. The fight continued, and that in itself, now not having a satellite truck at my disposal, but portable satellite gear in a war zone. Objective was the same: get on the air, cover the story, but in a much different environment than over here, and when we were in New York City. So leaving Afghanistan to not too long after that, doing yet another remote on the deck of an aircraft carrier. But this particular aircraft carrier, the USS Carl Vinson, was the very aircraft carrier that they bought the body of bin Laden. So now it's completely full circle, to being up there that day covering that, to actually going to Afghanistan, and then being on the very ship where he was bought to. It was something else. What a story, but at the same time, a big part of our history. And I was, got to be right in the middle of it.
Now you followed an operator in the satellite world, but you're kind of setting a standard now with the telest form of news gathering, and that's with drones. You're the king. You're the expert. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with drones, what you've had to learn, and just how that whole part of the business is unfolding now.
Like I mentioned before, technology is changing. Everybody knows that, and it's changing for us a lot too. We're still doing the same thing. We're still putting on the news. We're still broadcasting our air signal, but technology is allowing us to do things a little bit differently. So we have a helicopter, and it's used regularly. But our owner has always been a visionary, and he has given us a lot of tools to do our jobs with. So I once heard it said, "Don't ever say you couldn't do the story because you didn't have the means to do it." So yes, we are experimenting with drones right now, and the idea is that that's going to be a tool in our toolbox that's going to allow us to cover things in such a way that we haven't been able to really cover them before, not necessarily with an expensive big helicopter, where it's great to get shots from, but maybe in some certain situations you can't get as close as you would like to. Drones are allowing us to do that. So we've been, for the past year, in fact I just got back from what they call phase 2 of a program at Virginia Tech, and where we are committed to learning the safe way to do it, the proper way to do it. So we've done a few projects. We're working on a documentary right now down at the coast. Even done a project with you. So we're hoping that this drone program will turn out to be something that's really good for the TV news gathering business.
It gives you a few advantages, doesn't it? I remember looking at some of the footage over water, and unlike the helicopter, you didn't get the waves or whatever. It was crystal clear or something.
Correct. Yeah. With a full-size chopper, if you got too close to the water, the prop wash would cause a problem. With the drone, we were flying recently down at the coast, just a few feet above the water, and it allows you to get real close to some of the boats we were going. The documentary is on commercial fishermen, and so we were following some shrimp boats and some commercial fishermen in their boats. So yeah, it allows us to get very, very close without really spoiling the environment or what it is that they were doing. So it does have a lot of advantages to it. Tricky, but nonetheless, it provides us with beautiful pictures.
As you look back over the years of covering just all kinds of news and everything, do any events stand out? Obviously 9/11, you've already talked about that, but any other events that will just always stay in your mind?
Yes. You know, I mentioned I love sports, but we were fortunate enough to be able to go to the Super Bowl when the Panthers made it. That's one of the world's biggest sports stages. I truly enjoyed that project. Days were long, but again, you're at the Super Bowl. I've done 20 Final Fours as of this past year, 29 ACC tournaments. It's obvious the sports part of what I do has always been a passion for me. You know, the tornado that came through Raleigh, where I worked with Charlie Gaddy, that will be one that I don't think I will ever forget. I had friends that were also in the path of that tornado, and working directly with Charlie on that. That was one that stood out, and to this day, a lot of people remember it, and there's still scars from that. There's also been there was a time when we kind of made the news. The one event that stands out for me, John, I'm asked that a lot. You know, what's the one thing that stands out in your career? Of course, 9/11. But we had a situation years ago that we kind of became part of the news one night, not intentionally. We were on Grandfather's Mountain. The hurricanes that year were hooking inland and going over the western part of North Carolina. So I had covered the president that day in Winston-Salem, and I got shifted to Grandfather Mountain that evening. Scott Mason, our Tar Heel Traveler, was up there to do a story on Grandfather's Mountain, but it became a news story. So this particular evening, the storm was bearing down on us. We had winds at approximately 80 miles an hour. They had shut down access to the mountain, which rarely happens. And we had gone up to almost to the top of the mountain, where there's normally this really pretty waterfall, but now it was a raging, almost like something you see in a movie, or like Niagara Falls. And the wind was blowing at approximately 80 miles an hour. So we did our remote. We had a little bit of a wind block from the mountain. And there was an older gentleman there that I had seen at some of the sporting events, and I just assumed, you know, as I was thinking to myself, why would he be in such an environment? But maybe he's shooting some pictures for his magazine or newspaper, and I just always assumed that's what he had done over the years. But we had done our remote, and we were, I was literally feeding CBS New York when Scott Mason opened up the satellite door. He's normally very quiet and laid back, and he was extremely excited and yelling that he needed my help. So I signed off from New York, came out around the satellite truck, and again, you just have to envision winds at 80 miles an hour on top of a mountain is just not an everyday event. But he was looking over the side of the mountain with the photographer. So I went running over there, and I was like, what is wrong? And this older gentleman had fallen off the mountain. And again, I'm still processing this, and at one point there, we weren't sure that he was still alive. And this was straight off the side of a mountain on a little ledge, and if it hadn't been for that small ledge, he would have continued on. I think we were about a mile up. It would have been horrible, but we began to see some movement, and next thing I know, we're tying AC cables onto the bumper, and I'm shimmying down the side of a mountain to try to retrieve this gentleman up the side of the mountain, where a few minutes before we were reporting the news. Now we were trying to help an individual. Again, at the time, I thought he was a photographer, an older gentleman. You know, he was banged up a little bit, and literally inch by inch it was about a 20, 25-foot fall. And but inch by inch, we get him up the side of the mountain. Almost dark, and very, very scary situation because of the height. It's just a very dangerous situation. And come to find out, he's the owner of Grandfather's Mountain. It was Hugh Morton himself. But he had parked his car very close to the edge of the mountain, and he literally opened up his door. And when he went to step out, he stepped out to a fall. And he came within inches of driving his car. There was no guardrail or anything there that night. But it reminded me of how easy accidents can happen. And again, that particular incident, we actually were making the news that night as opposed to covering the news.
I have to compliment your storytelling style. You held the critical piece of that, the ID of who you were saving, to the very end. That was a nice story.
Yeah, and to this day, people ask me, what's the most incredible thing? What's some of the most incredible things you've ever covered? And that story always comes up, because as he drove off, I still did not know. I asked my reporter Scott, why would a newspaper photographer be up here in this, horrific conditions? Because this is not a situation where you would want an older gentleman up here, for that matter, anybody. And that's when he informed me that he actually owned the mountain. It was Hugh Morton. I probably should have known who he was, because he's famous. He was a famous North Carolinian, done many great things for this state. So we were glad to help him that night.
That's a great story, Tony. I don't know of anything else that could really top that, other than when you get ready to retire, would you accept a job back in the gardens?
I don't know if my back and shoulders would allow me to do that. But if that's what Mr. Goodman needed me to do, that is what I will do for him. Talking about coming full circle, yes, I would probably do that.
That's great. Thanks for doing this interview with us.
Yeah, thank you, John, for having me. Appreciate it.